All right, settle in tonight. We're not venturing into the comforting embrace of grand castles or the lively chatter of candlelit feasts. Instead, we're journeying back to a bleaker reality, the smoke-filled huts and the unforgiving, frozen earth of winter in the Middle Ages. This isn't the romanticized version you might imagine. There's no shining armor, no glorious battles. This is the raw, unvarnished truth of ordinary folk peasants, just like you, doing their absolute best to survive months of soul-numbing, cold, gnawing hunger and a heavy silence that pressed in from all sides. Snow drifts through gaping holes in the roof. Your precious bread turns to a stone-hard lump. Wolves, emboldened by their own starvation, draw ever closer to your small, vulnerable dwelling. Yet, with each brutal dawn, you rise and face it all again, a testament to sheer, unyielding will. If this kind of slow, grounded history helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you a sense of peace. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. There's a strange, quiet comfort in knowing who else is out there sharing this journey through time. So, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, distant hum in the background. Wrap yourself in something warm, perhaps a coarse wool blanket, and let's begin our descent into a season that didn't merely test people. It tried, with every icy breath, to utterly break them. You don't need a calendar or any revolutionary thinking to know when winter's icy grip is about to seize the land. You feel it first in your bones. They stiffen and ache, protesting with a creaking soreness that reminds you of yesterday's stale bread. Then you see it in the sky, which slowly relinquishes its vibrant blue for a kind of reluctant, watery gray, heavy with unspoken promises of snow. And finally, the animals, with their ancient wisdom, begin to look at you with quiet suspicion, their eyes holding a knowing glint, as if they understand a grim truth you're only just beginning to grasp. And let's be honest, they usually do. Autumn doesn't so much end as it performs a slow, reluctant retreat, like a weary traveler withdrawing from an unwelcome storm. Leaves fall, yes, in a rustling cascade of fading color, but it's more than just that visual cue. It's the subtle, insidious way the wind changes direction, no longer a playful breeze, but a sharp, probing entity. It starts slipping through the smallest gaps in your Waterlandaub cottage walls, exploring every crevice like an uninvited guest, poking and prodding, actively seeking out any lingering warmth and methodically evicting it. The chickens, usually a garrulous lot, grow quieter, huddling together for comfort. Your dog, sensing the shift, stops barking defiantly at the wind and begins listening to its mournful whispers, instead, his ears twitching with an almost human understanding. That's how you truly know it's nearly time for the deep freeze to descend. The sun, when it bothers to show its face at all, feels thin, its rays anemic, as if it has utterly forgotten how to be warm. Everyone in the village, from the youngest child practicing letters by candlelight to the blacksmith planning his next shop, walks just a bit faster, scuffing their worn shoes against the increasingly frozen earth. It's not because they're in a hurry to get anywhere in particular, but because standing still now hurts more than moving. There's no grand announcement, no dramatic blizzard arriving with a flourish of swirling snow. No winter, with its quiet dread, arrives like an overdue debt, silently, insidiously, and with a great deal of unavoidable consequence. The initial task, the very first line on your mental list, is always a futile act of denial. You pretend the biting cold is merely temporary, a passing chill, nothing more. You stubbornly wear the same coarse wool tunic you've worn since October, but now you layer it with a threadbare cloak that's more patched holes than original fabric. You tell yourself, with a desperate optimism, that you'll mend it soon. You won't. Not because your lazy heaven knows you're anything but because your only needle is bent. The precious threads have run out, and your fingers are already too numb with frost-bitten air to hold either steady. Let's be honest, we talk a lot about preparation, as if medieval people were always perfectly ready for the onslaught. But most winters, for ordinary people like you, arrive when you're still not quite finished with autumn's demanding tasks. There's always a corner of the thatch roof you meant to fix, or a stack of firewood you intended to chop, yet never got around to. Always something still left in the barren farmland garden that didn't get dried or salted or properly stored in time. Still, you do what you can, because survival teaches lessons money can't buy. You stuff straw between the gaps in the wattle and daub wall, feeling the cold metal biting your skin as you work. You drape cloth, heavy with collected dust-softened light, over the doorway, a meager barrier against the wind, whispering. You rearrange the straw mats, flattened by generations of bodies, so everyone sleeps a little closer to the central hearth, seeking the dim glow of the smoldering embers. Even old Uncle Gan, who always smells faintly of sheep and mutters in his sleep about debts no one remembers, gets a spot near the fire. You don't light roaring fires all day, every day. That's a luxury only the Lord or the priest can afford. Your precious wood is strictly for evenings, for cooking the meager meals, and for the hour or so when everyone in the family pretends to be cheerful, forcing weak smiles. The rest of the long, cold day, you rely on constant movement, layering every scrap of coarse wool you own, and the shared, reluctant body heat of several siblings pressed together under one scratchy blanket. The animals, your cohabitants and crucial livelihood, sense the shift they linger longer near the crude shelter, their instincts screaming of the quiet dread to come. The chickens huddle into a feathery mass. The pigs, usually boisterous, go eerily quiet, which is, honestly, deeply unsettling. The cows, well, they grow more irritable, which is to say they remain exactly the same, their usual bovine grumpiness, a constant in a changing world. Outside, the damp earth turns to iron, unyielding and unforgiving. The paths that were muddy tracks last week are now treacherous, half-frozen ruts that twist ankles and swallow worn shoes whole, threatening to pull you into the icy grip. The water in your handmade pottery bucket develops a skin of ice by morning. You break it with a rough wooden ladle, the cold metal biting your skin, then curse softly as the numbing cold seeps into your hands, making them ache. And the sky, the low, gray, expectant sky, just hangs there, a heavy blanket of stillness, thick enough to touch, like it's waiting for something unseen. You squint at it, as if you might read a message in the shifting clouds, as if they carry ancient warnings. They don't, but they do mean you won't see the sun again, not properly, for several weeks. In town, where the church sermons now emphasize compassion and community service more often, people walk faster, their echoing footsteps hurried. They speak in shorter, clipped sentences, their breath fogging in the frost-bitten air. Jokes dry up like forgotten puddles. No one's really in the mood for levity. Even the church sermons get a little darker, the priest reminding you that cold weather is, apparently, God's way of encouraging humility. You, however, can't help but wonder if God might consider a slightly warmer, less painful lesson plan for ordinary people. And then, finally, one morning, it happens. Snow. Not a roaring blizzard yet, not a catastrophe reshaping society, but just a delicate dusting. It looks like white flowers spilled across the barren farmland, but it changes everything, utterly and irrevocably. The thatch roofs, usually a drab brown, turn pristine white. Rooftops huddled like sleepy animals. The trees stiffen into skeletal silhouettes against the dim glow of dawn. Your breath comes out in little clouds of vapor, and every step you take outside sounds like you're stepping on old, brittle parchment, a sharp crack underfoot. And with that first snow, the real, quiet dread sets in. You're locked in now. The earth has effectively closed up shop for the season, a grim shop with no opening hours until spring. No more digging in the frozen soil, no more planting, no more hope of new growth. Nothing will grow now, not for months. What you've already stored in your meager pantry is all you've got. And if you didn't store enough, well, you'll soon learn how thin your watery stew can really get. How far desperation can stretch a few shriveled turnips. You begin to count things differently now, not in passing days or fleeting weeks, but in bundles. How many bundles of precious firewood are left? How many sacks of coarse grain? How many shriveled turnips remain? How many eggs this week? Not many, as the hens, sensible creatures, largely stop laying when it's so cold. They prefer to huddle near the smoldering embers of the fire, just like everyone else, finding their own small comfort. You keep yourself busy, always, even if nothing you do feels truly productive in the face of such overwhelming odds. You mend threadbare clothes, your fingers clumsy with cold. You scrape pans, the metal biting your skin. You stir the ashes in the hearth, hoping against hope that a warm coal is hiding underneath a small treasure in the dim glow. If there's time, and there often is, the heavy silence broken only by the wind howling, you spin wool on a crude spinning wheel. It's not just for making cloth. It's for keeping your hands moving, your mind occupied, to prevent your thoughts from getting too many dangerous ideas in the long, dark hours. These moments linger longer than the years that follow, imprinted on your memory. The animals, those furry and feathered cohabitants, are more than just company now. The warmer ones are invited inside the cottage. Not all at once. Mind you, there are boundaries. After all, some semblance of order must be maintained, but enough to turn your small or drafty home into a communal stew of earthy smells, muffled sounds, and desperately shared body heat. You get used to waking up with a goat breathing its surprisingly sweet breath on your neck. Well, perhaps not exactly used to, but you certainly stop fighting it, accepting it as part of the new normal. Evenings are, by far, the worst. The sun, a low, pale disk on the horizon, disappears too early, plunging the world into darkness that arrives like it's angry about something of palpable weight. Candles, made from precious tallow, are expensive, a luxury you can barely afford. Tallow lamps are smoky, filling the air with a choking haze that makes your lungs ache. You sit near the meager fire, if there's one going, and you listen to the wind howling through the cracks, to the rhythmic popping embers of the burning wood, to the hushed stories whispered in the lantern gold shadows. Sometimes, someone, usually Uncle Gan, after a particularly strong draught of weak ale, gets it into their head to tell a ghost story. This always seems like a good idea at first, a brief escape from the quiet dread, until you remember you'll have to walk across the freezing snow-blanketed yard to use the privy afterward. You run, bare feet stinging on the frost. You try not to trip on the frozen ruts. You definitely don't look too closely into the deep, inky shadows that dance at the edges of the limited light. And yet, winter, with all its brutal challenges, isn't entirely misery. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of bitter, unforgiving predictability that eventually becomes strangely comforting. You know the chores, the endless list of tasks. You know the limits, both of your body and of your meager supplies. And there's a strange, shared camaraderie, a quiet trust between neighbors, in knowing that everyone else is just as miserable as you are. You learn to find comfort in the smallest victories. Warm feet for 5 blessed minutes, a stew that tastes slightly less like despair, a rare day without the wind cutting through the cracks in the Waterland daub wall. You celebrate these small triumphs quietly, because the moment you laugh too loud, someone, usually the older, more cynical villagers, will remind you with a sigh that you've only just begun. Historically, we, the ordinary peasants, didn't fare too well in these prolonged, brutal winters. The Little Ice Age, which began around the 14th century, brought harsher, longer winters across Europe, a catastrophe reshaping society. Rivers froze solid, their surfaces becoming marketplaces, bustling with cautious optimism. Crops failed with alarming regularity. In some particularly grim years, the great river Rhine froze solid for months on end, allowing merchants to set up thriving new settlements of stalls right on the ice. Yes, people actually shopped on frozen rivers until the ice, with its own silent will, decided otherwise and began to crack. But what seems impossible eventually becomes the new normal. In exceptionally bad years, like the devastating period from 1315 to 1317, incessant rain ruined crops for entire seasons. It wasn't just bone-chilling cold, it was outright famine, affecting up to 30 million people across Europe. And when there's no food, when your stomach tells you first, loudly, repeatedly, people get imaginatively desperate. Whispers of cannibalism, hushed and horrifying, circulated. Infanticide, too, was rumored, though never spoken of openly. These weren't exactly dinner-table conversations, but then again, during those lean years, you didn't always have dinner to talk over. But that's the brutal thing about winter. It's not just about enduring the cold. It's about enduring each other in cramped, smoky spaces. Imagine a family of 6, 3 goats, 2 noisy chickens, and a bucket of questionable salted fish, all sharing 20 square feet of living space. That's not just a home. That's a social experiment with no exit, a test of patience and human limits. You hear every cough, every muffled complaint, every unfortunate digestive development from Uncle Gan. Privacy becomes a distant, forgotten myth, like a faded memory of a summer meadow. Modesty, a polite fiction, goes out with the last sliver of sunlight. You do your best not to argue, not out of any newfound patience, but because raising your voice stirs up the frigid air, letting in more of the bitter cold. And so you settle in, shrinking your entire world down to a few precious feet around the fire, a desperate huddle in the lantern gold shadows. You learn the exact weight of every coarse wool blanket, the familiar creak of every timber groaning under the weight of snow, the unpredictable rhythm of the ceaseless weather. Days shorten to mere suggestions of light. Nights lengthen into an endless, heavy silence, and time itself begins to dissolve into a sort of frozen, viscous soup. You're not exactly living, not in the joyful sense. You are enduring, and eventually you stop asking how long winter will last. You just wake up each day, your body aching with memory, and focus on surviving that single one. If you're lucky, the precious firewood holds out. If you're very lucky, the thatch roof, with its layers of dried plant matter, does too. Because, in a medieval winter, the cold doesn't bother to knock politely. It simply lets itself in, uninvited and unwelcome, and settles in for a long, arduous stay. And tomorrow, the entire grim cycle begins again. Winter doesn't just try to kill you with its bone-chilling cold. It kills you with chores, an endless, monotonous list of physical labor. And at the very top of that frozen to-do list, year after year, is wood. Endless amounts of it. You don't just need a few decorative logs for ambience, like a lord might in his great hall. You need firewood like your very life depends on it, because, quite simply, it does. Everything, every single aspect of your meager existence revolves around that flickering, precious fire. It cooks your meager food, warms your aching bones, dries your perpetually damp socks, scares off the scurrying rats, and makes your humble house mostly uninhabitable by filling it with smoke. Without it, you're not a peasant. You're a popsicle with taxes, a frozen testament to misfortune. But fire doesn't magically appear. It demands wood, lots of it, cut, carried, chopped, stacked, and cursed out with every swing of your blunt axe. Gathering firewood is the medieval equivalent of having a second, grueling, full-time job. Except this one pays only in searing back pain and the insidious creep of frostbite, cold metal biting your skin. There's no chainsaw to make quick work of it, no gas-powered anything, just an axe, its wooden handle smooth from repeated use, its blade blunt from generations of relentless hacking. It's been in your family so long, you're not sure if it's a tool or a cursed heirloom. The handle's cracked, the blade is dull, but it's still better than using your bare hands, which, let's face it, you'll probably have to do anyway once the axe gets hopelessly stuck in the third stubborn log. You try to start in autumn, of course. Everyone tells you to start early, to plan for the next season. Except there's never enough time, never enough daylight. The harvest always runs late, demanding every ounce of your strength. Your neighbor, that thieving scoundrel, borrowed your axe again, and you, with your typical bad luck, sprained your ankle trying to outrun an angry territorial goose. So, here you are in December, swinging steel at a tree like it personally insulted your mother, praying with every ounce of your being that it falls in the right direction, away from your meager hut. Trees, stubborn, ancient things, don't cooperate. They're heavy, unpredictable, and covered in a thick mantle of snow. You finally manage to hack one down, your muscles screaming in protest, only to realize, with a heavy sigh, that you still have to chop it into manageable pieces, carry it back through the snow-blanketed fields, and then stack it neatly against your timber-groaning cottage wall. Repeat 50 times. If you're lucky, your back just hurts, a dull, constant ache. If you're not, the tree lands on you, and you become another cautionary tale whispered around the dim glow of the evening fire. Once the wood is chopped, it desperately needs to dry, a process that takes months of patient waiting. So, you burn it wet, which means it smokes, hisses, and barely burns at all, filling your home with a choking haze. Congratulations, you've just turned your humble dwelling into a tepid, smoky nightmare. Hope you weren't planning to breathe properly this winter. The rich, with their revolutionary thinking and new blood, of course, have options. They hire people. They send servants, actual servants, into the freezing woods while they sip spiced wine in front of a roaring grand hearth. You, however, are the servant, the ordinary person, and your hearth is mostly a pathetic pile of wet twigs trying their very best to ignite. Legally, you're not even allowed to gather wood in some places, not on the Lord's land. The dense, ancient forests belong exclusively to the noble, inherited status, unchallenged. And if you're caught collecting kindling even just fallen sticks on noble land, the punishment ranges from crippling fines you can ill afford, to brutal beatings, to occasionally being made a terrifying example of, just for picking up a few twigs. Yes, really. That's why many peasants, resourceful and desperate, turn to alternatives. Things like peat, dried animal dung, or bundles of thorny brush. These technically burn in the same way that technically watery soup counts as a meal. Peat gives off a certain heat, but it also gives off a pervasive smell like wet ashes and bitter regret clinging to your coarse wool clothes. Dried animal dung, yes, dung burns surprisingly well, but let's not pretend anyone's happy about resorting to such measures. Still, you use what you have. You gather dried cow patties, with hands numb from the cold metal biting your skin, and you pretend you're not inhaling memories of last summer's lush pasture. The good news, it's free. The bad news, your cottage now smells like a campfire held inside a very uncleaned barn, filling the air with a heavy silence that only smoke and desperation can bring. Stacking firewood is an art, a delicate balance. Too tight, and it molds, turning your precious fuel into useless rot. Too loose, and it falls over, scattering logs everywhere and breaking your already frost-bitten toe. So, you build a neat, compact pile against the timber-groaning wall of your house. Wrap it with whatever canvas you can cleverly steal from your cousin, and hope against hope that it doesn't collapse under the next heavy snowfall. It will, and you never, ever have enough. That's the golden rule of medieval winter. It doesn't matter how much wood you cut, how much sweat you pour into the effort. It's never, ever enough. By February, you're down to burning fence posts, old, splintered furniture, or anything that vaguely resembles timber. There's no sentimentality now. If it catches fire, it's fuel. You dream of firewood, its warmth, a constant, elusive promise. You count logs instead of sheep, your mind consumed by the endless task. You have actual arguments, hushed but furious, over who burned the good stick too early, wasting its precious heat. You ration smoldering embers, hoarding coals like their priceless treasure. And if you manage to find a particularly dry branch, a gift from the frostbitten air hidden under the snow, you bring it home like a war trophy, a small, hard-won victory in the quiet dread of winter. These moments linger longer than the years that follow. Sleeping in winter, let's be honest, is a gamble. If the fire dies out overnight, the temperature inside your dwelling drops to hope you wrote a will levels. You tuck in close, under layers of coarse wool blankets, old furs, and other human bodies. Not because you particularly like them, especially Uncle Gan, but because survival beats personal space every single time. In some homes, livestock also sleep inside, sharing the communal stew of smells and sounds, not out of kindness, not for companionship, but out of sheer necessity. Chickens, nestled in corners, provide a few precious eggs and a surprising amount of ambient warmth. Pigs, with their bulk, are like living radiators with hooves. Cows are basically space heaters that moo, their breath fogging in the dim glow. It's not cozy, by any stretch of the imagination. It's crowded, noisy, and smells distinctly like a petting zoo that has somehow collapsed into a soup kitchen. But it's marginally better than freezing to death, so you endure. Historically, peasants didn't just rely on their own individual, back-breaking effort. Communities often worked together to chop and haul wood, a testament to compassion and community service. It was less about joyful bonding and more about shared suffering, a silent acknowledgement of collective misery. Everyone had blisters. Everyone was freezing, cold metal biting their skin. Everyone was equally miserable, which, strangely, made it slightly easier to endure. Change sneaks in where no one notices, a testament to human resilience. In some regions, people used clever wood-saving tricks, born of practical guidance and entrepreneurial ambition. Clay ovens were often shared, becoming communal village assets. Communal fires, roaring in central pits, were maintained all day, everyone contributing. You'd take turns baking your rock-hard bread in the village oven, all while pretending not to notice how suspiciously warm Annis's house always seemed to be, even in the deepest freeze. Women and children, ordinary people empowered to act, gathered kindling, not because it was easier, but because that's just how the labor got divided in these new ways of doing things. If you were small and had fingers that weren't completely frostbitten, you were sent to the woods with a basket and told, quite simply, not to come back empty-handed. What you returned with might have been twigs, might have been pine cones. Either way, you contributed your small part to the collective survival. And then there's the chopping itself, a deeply medieval kind of misery. Your crude gloves, if you even have them, are soaked through in minutes, stiff with frozen water. Your fingers quickly go numb, losing all sensation. The axe slips in your grasp. The wood splits wrong, sending dangerous shards flying. Something, inevitably, hits your shin with a sharp crack. You yell, a raw, frustrated sound, not because it helps, but because that's all you've got left to give, a primal scream into the heavy silence. By midwinter, the ground is too hard to chop into, a solid, unforgiving block of ice. Your hands have more splinters than skin, a testament to the brutal labor, and you, still haven't figured out where half your carefully stacked woodpile disappeared to. Spoiler alert, your neighbor borrowed it again, the opportunistic scoundrel. And yet, you keep going, because fire is non-negotiable. It's warmth, it's food. It's the essential difference between making it to spring or becoming another tragic reason why your cottage smells even worse come April. When you sit by the flickering, dim glow of the fire at night, exhausted, sore, and lightly smoked, you feel something akin to peace, not true comfort, just the absence of immediate doom, which, in the Middle Ages, is as close as you're going to get to contentment. Of course, some winters are worse than others. You remember the truly bad ones by name, the winter of '43. When the timber-groaning roof collapsed under a heavy snow, or the long freeze, when the great river turned to stone, and everyone, with a rare spark of playfulness, tried ice skating in their wooden shoes. Some didn't make it. A few simply froze to death in the frost-bitten air. A few, unable to endure the quiet dread, just left, walking out into the snow-blanketed fields and never coming back. You stop asking questions after a while, accepting the harsh reality as part of life. The firewood dwindles. The wind howls its mournful song. You find yourself eyeing your meager furniture a little differently. That stool you never liked suddenly looks surprisingly flammable. Sentiment gives way to stark, brutal survival. If it burns, it's fuel, no matter its previous purpose. Eventually, mercifully, the thaw comes. The snow retreats like a tired thief, slowly giving up its icy grip. The mud returns, thick and cloying, and your worn shoes vanish somewhere in its depths. But you made it. You survived another medieval winter without running out of precious wood, without freezing to death, and without strangling your cousin for stealing your best, driest log. That's the victory. No medals, no parade, no recognition, just frost-bitten fingers, the permanent smell of smoke clinging to your coarse wool clothes, and the deeply satisfying, almost miraculous knowledge that you're not a popsicle, not this year, anyway. And the next morning, as the morning mist curls across the fields, you do it all over again. Because even as spring edges tantalizingly closer, the bone-chilling cold lingers, the endless chores never stop, and the fire, that fickle, flickering little god in your hearth, always wants more. More wood, more sweat, more of you, and you give it, because in the end, it's not about comfort, it's about survival. One splinter at a time, and tomorrow, the same routine. Chop, stack, burn, freeze, repeat. You don't beat winter, you merely survive it. And if you're lucky, next year's axe won't break before your spirit does. Because, in the end, winter doesn't care how tired you are, how weary your bones. The logs won't chop themselves, the fire won't feed itself, and warmth, that rare, fleeting, precious thing, has to be earned every single day with every fiber of your being. You don't need a calendar or even the sun low on the horizon to know it's winter. Your stomach tells you first, loudly, repeatedly. It's not hunger in the modern sense, that gentle rumble that casually reminds you to check the fridge. It's deeper, angrier, the kind of profound emptiness that makes you stare at the bark of a tree and wonder, with a desperate practicality, could I stew that? Food in a medieval winter is like firewood, always running out, never easy to get, and absolutely guaranteed to cause arguments, chipping away at the fragile peace. You don't plan lavish meals, or even simple ones. You ration them meticulously, stretching every morsel. You look at 3 shriveled turnips, and with a grim determination, call it a feast, a grand culinary achievement. You start with what you've stored since autumn, grains, mostly coarse, barley, rye, oats, or wheat if you're a bit wealthier, or clever enough to steal from someone who is. You keep them in rough sacks, wooden barrels, or anything that might keep out the relentless rats, which, let's be honest, is nothing. The rats always find a way. They're like furry, scuttling tax collectors with sharp teeth, claiming their share of your meager bounty. Most of your meals revolve around pottage, the medieval mystery stew. It's not so much a precise recipe as a lifelong, desperate experiment. You throw in whatever's remotely edible and hope, with every stirring of the pot, that it doesn't actively kill you. Root vegetables, dried beans, wilted greens, maybe a strip of dried, impossibly tough pork if you've got royal connections, or a surprisingly generous neighbor. It simmers for days, sometimes weeks, over the smoldering embers of the fire. New ingredients are simply added to the pot. Old ones never quite leave, becoming part of the amorphous whole. It tastes like boiled earth, with a faint hint of onion and bitter regret. You eat it anyway, every day, twice a day, if you're lucky. Not because you like it, but because it's there, a warm, if unappetizing, presence in your gut. And in winter, that's enough. Meat is a rare, almost mythical treat. You don't have a freezer, or even a properly cold cellar, just a slightly less awful corner of your smoke-filled cottage. If you did manage to slaughter something in the fall, a pig, a goat, or your neighbor's least favorite chicken, you salt it, smoke it, dry it, and then hide it with extreme care from everyone in the house, especially the perpetually hungry children. Kids will eat anything, including raw bacon and the coarse rope you tied it with. Sometimes, if the river isn't completely frozen over, if the ice isn't too thick, and if you haven't already burned your fishing rod for kindling, you try to fish. Ice fishing is a thing, definitely, just not a fun thing, not with your fingers going numb. You chip away at a hole in the thick ice, the cold metal biting your skin, while your toes slowly lose all sensation. Then you sit, shivering, waiting, and contemplating how your life became a series of increasingly stupid and desperate decisions. If you're near the sea, a rare luxury, you might dry some herring or smoke an eel. Its oily flesh, nutritious and long-lasting, though it tastes exactly how it sounds, fishy and smoky. If you're not near water, you rely on whatever your neighbors, with their cautious trust, didn't guard well enough from your hungry gaze. Bread is essential, the staff of life, but it's also a gamble. Made from whatever coarse flour you've got, rye, sometimes even lentils, and often padded out with desperate fillers. Sawdust, yes, actual sawdust, ground acorns, maybe even bark in a truly bad year. Your bread isn't soft and fluffy. It's a blunt object, something between food and a medieval defense weapon, dense and hard as stone. And sometimes, even the bread fights back. In damp storage, rye can grow a fungus called ergot, a delightful little microbe that causes vivid hallucinations, violent convulsions, and occasionally a quiet death. You don't know this, of course. All you know is that this particular batch of bread makes you see strange colors, scream at the low gray clouds, and possibly become a religious visionary or a witch, depending on who's watching your odd behavior. Dairy helps if you have animals that haven't frozen, wandered off, or been eaten by starving wolves. Milk spoils quickly in the not quite cold enough environment, so you turn it into butter or hard cheese. The cheese is hard, salty, and vaguely threatening, like an angry old man. Butter is a rare luxury. You keep it wrapped in coarse cloth, hidden under your straw bed like it's pure gold, because in winter it basically is. Eggs, not likely. Chickens slow down their laying in the bone-chilling cold. They're too busy trying desperately not to die. You might get 1 a week, maybe 2 if you speak nicely to the hens and threaten the arrogant rooster. That precious egg goes straight into the pottage, or you stare at it long enough, imagining its richness, to get full from sheer imagination alone. Fresh fruits and vegetables, that's adorable. No apples, no leafy greens to be found. Maybe a dried plum from last August, if it didn't rot or become home to a plump, unwelcome worm. Most of your meager vitamin C comes from sour cabbage or fermented turnip, lovingly described by Uncle Gan as crunchy disappointment in vinegar. It keeps scurvy away, but it also keeps away any lingering friends. Preservation is everything in this harsh world. You salt, smoke, pickle, and dry anything that once moved, grew, or was even near something that did. You make jams from wild berries if you managed to find them and didn't eat them all in a sugar-starved frenzy last summer. You hang herbs from the low ceiling until they drop into the soup one by one like leafy confetti, adding an unexpected flavor. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is wasted. bones are boiled twice, their marrow scraped clean. The precious animal fat is saved and rendered. Even the ashes from the fire, the smoldering embers, end up in crude soap or used to scrub your handmade pottery pots. If someone throws away food, even a small scrap, you question their sanity, or you marry them because clearly they're wealthy enough to waste things. And then there's hunger itself. Not mild hunger, not I skipped lunch hunger, but the kind of deep, gnawing emptiness that makes you feel your stomach rubbing against your spine. The kind that makes you chew slowly, not for flavor, but to make every meager bite last, to prolong the sensation of something in your mouth. Hunger is a full-time, relentless presence in winter. It sits with you by the fire, watches you cook, comments on your meager portions, silently judges your neighbor's squirrel stew, and then, with a terrifying practicality, says, "Actually, that looks all right." There's a grim rhythm to it. You wake up hungry. You go to bed still hungry. You learn to live with the gnawing feeling, like a mouse endlessly chewing inside your belly, a constant, unpleasant companion. Eventually, you stop noticing it until you catch the faint, alluring smell of stew from a neighbor's hut, and immediately consider selling a sibling for a bowl. Even the better-off peasants don't eat well. They just eat slightly more of the same bland, mealy disappointment. Their diet's equally monotonous. Occasionally, someone manages a real treat, a piece of honeycomb, a few shriveled apple slices, a tiny slice of salted beef the size of a coin. It's a celebration, not for the flavor, but for the stark reminder that life isn't always awful, that small joys can exist even in the quiet dread. And then come the lean years, the bad harvests, the catastrophic crop failures, a true catastrophe reshaping society. You remember the winter of 1316, or at least the terrifying stories passed down through generations. Heavy, ceaseless rains drowned the fields, rotting the precious crops. Rot set in. Grain yields collapsed entirely. Livestock starved, their thin bodies testament to the brutal conditions. Entire villages went hungry, then silent. They called it the Great Famine, not for dramatic flair, but because it really was that bad. Some people ate roots, scrabbling in the frozen earth. Some ate moss, stripping it from trees. Some, well, let's just say medieval cookbooks don't list stewed shoe leather for nothing, a stark testament to desperation. Monks kept records, bless them. They wrote about entire families vanishing, about parents having to choose which child got the last precious crust of bread, about people found dead in snowdrifts, clutching shriveled turnips like they were priceless treasure. It's not folklore. It's the forgotten footnotes of history, a raw and brutal truth. And when you do, miraculously, find some food, the fire has usually gone out, leaving only smoldering embers and frost-bitten air. So you eat cold stew by candlelight, huddled under a fur that still smells strongly of the animal it came from in the lantern gold shadows. And you're grateful, profoundly grateful, because at least it's food. At least you get to chew something that isn't your own lip. Meals are short, consumed quickly. The hunger, however, is long, a constant companion. You scrape your wooden bowl clean, not out of manners, but because you need every single crumb. You lick your fingers, scrape the pot, and even consider eating the pot itself before remembering it's your only one. Your body changes. You move slower. Your movements deliberate. You lose weight. You don't call it dieting. You call it still alive. A grim victory. And yet, you keep going. Because hunger is a fact of winter, a constant, not a temporary crisis. You don't expect to feel full. You just hope not to feel worse. That's winter. Not a battle, but a relentless negotiation between you, your meager pantry, and the dwindling number of meals until the faint promise of April. There's no holiday feast unless you're extraordinarily lucky or unusually well connected. Maybe you save a precious sausage for Christmas, a tiny indulgence. Maybe a generous neighbor with whom you share a cautious trust shares a pie made with mystery meat and a lot of courage. You don't ask questions. You eat. You force a smile. And you try, desperately, not to cry when it's gone in 3 swift bites. Even the celebration foods, such as they are practical, focused on survival. Spiced ale, if you can possibly afford expensive spices. Nutcakes, if anyone had managed to hoard a few nuts. Pies filled with dried fruits, soaked not in syrup, but in sheer desperation. They're more ritual than true indulgence, a way to remind yourself and your shivering relatives that joy exists even if it's crusted in soot and shared with a dozen freezing people in a small, smoke-filled hut. So, what did you eat in a medieval winter? Anything that wouldn't eat you first. Anything you could preserve, hide, or boil until it stopped arguing, losing its original identity in the process. You didn't die. You survived. Because in the end, hunger wears a coarse wool coat. It wraps around you, a constant, chilling embrace. It stays close, whispering in your ear, reminding you of its presence. And when spring finally arrives, that first brave green shoot you see emerging from the damp earth, you don't admire it, you bite it. Your home in the Middle Ages is not a refuge, not a sanctuary, not by any modern standard a true building. It's more like a wooden suggestion of shelter, loosely stapled to a dirt floor, held together by good intentions, dried mud, and the unspoken agreement that nobody, especially Uncle Gan, sneezes too hard. Let's start with the walls. Wattle and daub, if you're lucky. That's woven wooden strips, rough straw, covered in mud, more straw, and whatever else was lying around. Cow dung, animal hair, local gossip. You pack it all together and pray with desperate hope that it hardens before the next fierce storm hits. Spoiler, it doesn't. On a good day, the wind merely whistles mournfully through the numerous cracks, a quiet dread. On a bad day, the wind howls through like it owns the place and is demanding rent from your very bones. There is no insulation, there is no sealant, there's just the outside, and then a slightly less outside, separated by a thin, permeable barrier. Your roof is thatched, of course, which sounds quaint and charming until you realize it's just dried plant matter, usually reeds or straw, arranged in a vaguely triangular shape. It leaks constantly. Rain comes in, dribbling down the walls. Snow piles up on the roof, blanketing it in a thick, insulating layer. Birds, with their new blood and new ideas, nest in it, making themselves at home. Mice move in and start charging you metaphorical rent, gnawing at your meager stores. If you're lucky, it only partially collapses during a particularly violent storm. If you're not, you wake up with your ceiling in your lap and a startled chicken on your face, squawking in surprise. The floor, dirt, just damp earth, compacted by generations of echoing footsteps. If it's muddy, you wait for it to dry. If it's frozen, you slip and slide, risking a broken bone. If it's dry, it turns to dust, which gets into everything. Your lungs, your eyes, your precious pottage. You try throwing down fresh straw to soften it. A temporary reprieve. but that lasts approximately 6 hours before turning into a trampled, moldy paste that somehow smells like feet and silent despair clinging to your rough straw mats. Windows, don't be silly. Glass is for churches, for the wealthy, for inherited status, a sign of revolutionary thinking. You have holes. If you're feeling particularly fancy, with a burst of entrepreneurial ambition, maybe you stretch some oiled parchment, thick and fibrous, over the opening. It lets in a meager, dust-softened light, but also every draft between now and Easter, bringing in the frost-bitten air. Curtains. Coarse wool cloth is too valuable to waste on luxuries like privacy. Doors barely latch, their worn wooden handles smooth from repeated use, the hinges groan like wounded animals, protesting every movement. You can barricade it with a log, if you're lucky enough to have one left. Or if you're short on logs, because you've already burned them for heat, maybe just hope the wind isn't in a mischievous mood. Fireplaces are central, yes, but not in a cozy, modern way. There's a fire pit, a simple circle of stones, right in the middle of the room. No chimney, just a hole in the roof, a crude opening to the outside. So, the smoke rises slowly, lazily, filling your home with a lovely gray fog that coats your Waterland ob walls, your lungs, and any lingering hope you had of clear breathing until spring. You don't smell the smoke after a while. You are the smoke, its acrid scent clinging to your coarse wool clothing. Now, let's talk furniture. You don't have much. A wooden bench, perhaps a single stool, a rough table if you're living the high life, a truly wealthy peasant with opportunities abound. Beds are communal, shared with your spouse, your numerous children, and occasionally your valuable livestock. The mattress is straw, rough straw, stuffed into a coarse sack, which sounds fine until you remember that straw doesn't stay fluffy. It compresses into a hard lump, molds in the damp earth, and actively invites all manner of bugs and vermin, those tiny predators. Your pillow is another sack. If you're lucky, it's full of feathers, a rare luxury. If you're not, it's just more straw, possibly slightly less crunchy than your mattress. Blankets are coarse wool, if you've got it, or furs if something nearby died recently. Most nights, you sleep in your clothes, under everything you own, hoping shared body heat plus desperate faith equals survival in the frostbitten air. And if your fire dies out overnight, you wake up frozen, shivering uncontrollably in your own breath cloud, silently questioning every decision that led to this dismal point. Heating the place is a constant, grueling challenge. You keep the fire going, sure, coaxing the smoldering embers, but heat rises, smoke rises, and unfortunately, you're sleeping on the dirt floor, which means your toes freeze while your timber-groaning rafters get a lovely, smoky sauna experience. Stones, cold to the touch, arranged around the hearth, help. They absorb the heat and release it slowly. A small comfort, but only if you have enough precious fuel to make them warm in the first place. An ongoing struggle. You seal up cracks in the walls with moss, scraps of coarse wool cloth, or fresh mud. It doesn't work, not really. The wind finds a way. It always finds a way, a silent, unseen predator. There are days, many days, when you swear the air inside your hut is colder than the air outside. A perverse trick of the quiet dread. You long to do something about it, but your fingers are already too numb to untie your cloak, let alone attempt a repair. Lighting is another daily delight. You've got tallow candles, which drip, sputter, and reek of beef fat, filling the air with a cloying scent. or rush-light sreeds dipped in animal grease, which burn like someone tried to weaponize a salad. The smoke from these meager lights mingles with the smoke from the hearth, until the whole room is a low-hanging haze of medieval asthma triggers. A thick gray cloud in the lantern gold shadows. And let's not forget the noise. Thin, porous walls mean you hear everything. The wind howling, the restless livestock, your neighbor sneezing through the timber groaning wall, your own stomach growling back at you like it's filing a formal complaint. Privacy, a myth. Solitude, only if you walk into the deep, dark forest and never, ever come back. Of course, it's not just people living here. Your cottage shares its meager space with animals, an essential part of your life and livelihood. Chickens nest in dusty corners, laying their precious, if rare, eggs. A goat, with its surprisingly warm body, sleeps under the rough wooden table. If you've got a cow, she lives in the lean-to attached to the wall, unless it's too cold, in which case she joins you in the main room, her gentle mooing a constant companion. There is no such thing as indoor and outdoor in this harsh reality. There is only not dead from the cold. This makes the house warmer, slightly. It also makes it louder, messier, and smell distinctly like a barn that recently lost a bet, a potent blend of damp earth and animal musk. You sweep the dirt floors with a crude broom, but the dirt just rearranges itself, stubbornly refusing to leave. The rough straw bedding, flattened by generations, smells like old milk and animal waste. And if a chicken decides to lay an egg right next to your head in the middle of the night, you say thank you, profoundly grateful for the bounty, and try to fall back asleep before it poops on your coarse wool blanket. Your roof, with its thick thatch, also houses guests, birds, rats, insects, Saul, the tiny predators. The thatch is thick enough for nesting, which means, come spring, you'll hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet above you at all hours, an unexpected orchestra. Sometimes, a rat falls in, landing with a hollow thud. It's normal. You scream, the rat screams, and then you both pretend it never happened. A shared, silent trauma. Maintenance is constant, an endless chore. Your crude door cracks. The timber groaning rafters bend under the weight of snow. Doors sag on their rusty hinges. The relentless wind tears at the thatch roof, threatening to rip it away entirely. You fix what you can with what little you have, which is usually just coarse rope, desperate hope, and a very dull knife, the cold metal biting your skin. You can't afford precious nails. They're a luxury for lords. You wedge things into place. You hammer rough wood together using a heavy rock and a fervent prayer. And if it's raining and the roof is leaking, you don't just grab a single bucket. You grab all the buckets, positioning them around the house like you're trying to win a very sad, very wet game of splash chess. You learn precisely which spots drip first. You name them, you curse them. You learn to sleep around them, adapting to the constant, rhythmic dripping in the heavy silence. It's not all doom and quiet dread, of course. There are warm moments, brief and fleeting. The fire catches well, sending a burst of warmth. Someone shares a precious fur blanket. A persistent draft, for no discernible reason, simply stops, and you convince yourself it's your ingenious craftsmanship, a small triumph. You huddle close with your family, wrapped in coarse wool, and pretend the collective animal and human smell is comforting. It's not, but it is familiar, a constant presence. Still, you endure it, because this isn't just a fragile pile of timber and bad smells. It's home. It's where you were born, where your children were born, and where someone probably died last week. They're quiet, passing a constant, unspoken reminder. You patch it, cherished relative, urging it. Just hold on a little longer. You don't compare it to a grand castle, with its stone walls and roaring fires. You compare it to not freezing to death in the frost-bitten air, and by that stark measure, it's doing just fine, a testament to endurance. Some wealthier peasants, with new ways of doing things, whitewash their Waterland daub walls, not for luxury or aesthetics, but for lice. The lime, a cheap, effective agent, kills bugs, keeping the infestations mostly cosmetic, a small victory. You think about doing it yourself, even collect the necessary lime. But then the precious firewood runs out again, a far more pressing concern, and the task is forgotten. You hang herbs from the ceiling, their faded colors adding a touch of fragile beauty, hoping to make the air smell nicer than wet ashes and regret. They dry out, crumble, and inevitably fall into your pottage. You eat them anyway. The taste is weird, a subtle bitterness, but you tell yourself it's seasoning. It's not. And every so often, in the long, dark evenings, you dream of a second room, of a proper wooden floor, of a roof that doesn't make you flinch every time a gust of wind picks up. You don't expect it. You just let the thought, a dangerous luxury, sit with you while you stitch another clumsy patch into the timber-groaning wall, listening to the rain come through the ceiling. Because, in the end, your house isn't warm, or dry, or peaceful, but it's still standing. And in a medieval winter, that's about as close to luxury as you're ever going to get. It's dawn, or close enough. There's a faint, dust-softened light outside that might be the sun, or just the weary moon finally giving up its struggle against the encroaching day. Either way, it's time to get up. Not because you're rested, you're not. Your body aching with memory. Not because you're excited, you're definitely not. But because your very life and the lives of your family depends on getting things done before frostbite, famine, or your neighbor's perpetually hungry goat beats you to the precious, half-frozen water source. There's no weekend in this life. There's no me time. There's barely enough time to scrape the frost off your eyebrows. A grim morning ritual. Every day is a relentless repeat of the last. Gather, mend, feed, carry, boil, patch, repeat. Winter in medieval Europe is a season-long to-do list, written not on parchment, but in mud, smoke, and bone-deep fatigue. First job always is to get the fire going. You hope the smoldering embers, carefully banked, survived the night. If not, you're back to flint and steel, hunched over damp kindling with frozen fingers, your breath so visible in the frost-bitten air it could be mistaken for a ghost, a quiet dread. Precious wood is rationed. You use it sparingly, carefully. A good fire means warmth, precious warmth, cooked food, light, and life itself. A bad one means all of the above slowly slip away while you pretend you're not crying from the acrid smoke filling your lungs. Once the fire's going, or at least coughing along like an asthmatic squirrel struggling to ignite, it's time for water. The wooden bucket, handmade pottery, is heavy, its rough handle cold to the touch. The stream, your only source, is half frozen, its surface slick with a thin skin of ice, and the path leading to it is icy enough to host the worst Olympics event in history, peasant figure skating. You fall, your worn shoes scuffing the frost. You spill some precious water. You curse the ice, the bucket, and the cruel joke that is winter. Then you do it again, because water, that vital commodity, doesn't fetch itself. Back home, you boil it, not because you're a health nut or for revolutionary thinking, but because drinking it unboiled might actively kill you, bringing on the dreaded flux. Every sip is a gamble, a test of faith. Boiling water is also how you warm your frost-bitten hands, steam the inside of your hut, and delay feeling like a medieval failure for 10 more precious minutes. Next, the animals. They need feeding before you do. The chickens are annoyed, clucking their displeasure. The pigs are loud, grunting their demands. The cow, with her steady gaze, is silently judging you. You scrape together old, moldy hay, kitchen scraps, and whatever hasn't frozen solid into an unyielding block. You check the crude chicken coop for eggs. There aren't any. Again, the arrogant rooster, however, has plenty of opinions, crowing loudly in the morning mist. If it snowed overnight, you clear the path to the door, not because you're tidy or for aesthetic pleasure, but because falling into a deep snowdrift while holding a bucket of pig slop is the kind of memory that sticks, a constant reminder of winter's indignities. You shovel with a flat plank of wood, your hands wrapped in coarse rags, and mutter things that would surely get you excommunicated if anyone heard, a litany of curses against the quiet dread. With the animals fed and your fingers halfway thawed, stinging with renewed sensation, it's time for breakfast, if you can even call it that. Yesterday's pottage reheated with today's regrets. Maybe some crusty bread, hard as a rock, maybe not. If someone, bless their tired soul, remembered to scrape the pot clean last night, you're scraping the scrapings, a desperate search for sustenance. No one complains. Complaining takes precious energy, and you have none to spare. Then it's time for the asterisk, real asterisk work, the core of your existence. If you're a man, it's endless chores in the frozen fields, the deep, snow-blanketed forest, or perhaps in the smoke-filled forge. If you're a woman, it's everything else. Spinning wool, mending threadbare clothes, making what little food there is, cleaning the omnipresent soot, hauling heavy water, stirring the pot, and somehow keeping 6 children alive while pretending your hands aren't frozen into permanent claw shapes. Repairing the roof, that's your job. Fetching firewood, also your job. The cold metal biting your skin, making sure the goat doesn't freeze, escape, or explode from some strange medieval ailment, still your job. There are no neat task lists, just a rolling, relentless stream of crises that need solving before nightfall, before the darkness arrives with its quiet dread. Laundry is a rare, once-a-week event, and it's its own unique form of purgatory. You drag the coarse wool clothes to the nearest river, break through the thick, jagged ice with a heavy stick, and scrub with a harsh mix of ash and lye until your knuckles bleed and your soul, quite literally, leaves your body, fleeing the frost-bitten air. Rinse, freeze, repeat, a brutal cycle. Cooking, such as it is a game of improvisation and severely lowered expectations. You stir the same pot you used yesterday, the crude, handmade pottery, its contents now a gray sludge. You skim the surface for any signs of mold, add more precious water, maybe some dried herbs, if you have any left, maybe a pebble for texture, a desperate measure. You serve it hot, whatever it is, and call it soup. Afternoons are for fixing things, endless repairs, tools, fences, even strained relationships frayed by arguments over who ate the last shriveled turnip. You sharpen blades with a whetstone that's older than your grandfather, who, incidentally, died falling off the very same rickety ladder you now use to patch the timber-groaning ceiling. Children help, in theory. Mostly they get underfoot, a constant distraction. But even toddlers are handed tasks, holding yarn while someone spins, scaring off crows from precious grain, carrying small, light bundles of kindling. They work because they have to, because survival depends on it. Playtime is what happens when they finish early. And no one, not once, ever finishes early in a medieval winter. Inside, the spinning wheel turns endlessly, its rhythmic creaking a constant backdrop to the heavy silence. Wool doesn't spin itself, linen doesn't weave itself. Every coarse thread in every threadbare tunic has passed through hands that ache, that sting with cold. Gloves are a luxury. Calluses are standard issue, an expected badge of honor. And if you drop a precious spindle and it rolls into the fire, consumed by the smoldering embers, you just stare for a long, silent moment and quietly consider walking into the flames after it. Such is your despair. By late afternoon, it's already dim, the sun low on the horizon, barely trying in winter. Shadows stretch long, merging into the quiet dread. You rush to finish the day's tasks before the meager light fails completely. You patch wattle and daub walls with fresh mud, rehang sagging door hinges, fix a leaking thatch roof with nothing but rough straw, a heavy rock, and wildly misplaced optimism. Then you prep for the evening, stir the gray stew, stoke the fire, scrape the thick frost off the inside of your water bucket. You change into warmer clothes, which are the exact same clothes you wore all day, but with one more layer of sheer sadness. Dinner arrives, such as it is. A bit of stew, some crusty bread, a communal mug of weak ale or water that's been boiled 3 times just to make it less deadly. You sit near the hearth, not too close to avoid the sparks, not too far to avoid frostbite. You eat fast, quickly, because the meager warmth fades quickly. Afterward, there's no winding down, no leisure. You're still spinning thread, mending socks, patching cloaks, scraping soot from every surface. Children sleep near the fire, a tangle of limbs and soft snoring in the lantern gold shadows. Adults stay up, not for leisure, but because the fire needs tending, and tomorrow's firewood still needs hauling. If you're lucky, there's a song, a quiet, mournful tune. Someone sings softly while spinning or shelling peas. It's not joyful, not exactly, but it is comfort, a fragile solace in the heavy silence, a reminder that life still exists outside the relentless labor, just barely. Night falls early, a blanket of quiet dread. You lay down in the same clothes, under the same damp, coarse wool blanket, on the same lumpy straw mattress. You listen to the wind rattling the crude shutters, the timber groaning, the distant clanging of a blacksmith, a muffled chatter from a neighbor's hut. You hear the goat fart in its sleep, a surprisingly loud noise. You hope the roof holds. You hope tomorrow is warmer, or at least not worse. You fall asleep mid-thought, not because you're calm, but because exhaustion is the only lullaby you can afford. Of course, this is just one day. Tomorrow you do it all again, an endless, repeating cycle. Every chore repeats, every moment aches. There's no such thing as catching up, only falling behind more slowly, a gradual slide into despair. Holidays are rare and often misleading. A day off might mean attending church in the biting cold, standing for hours while a priest, with his new ways of doing things, reminds you that suffering is good for the soul, a peculiar form of spiritual enrichment. Then you return home, your body aching with memory, and catch up on all the chores you couldn't do because of all that spiritual enlightenment. The rhythm of winter life is monotony with incredibly high stakes. You don't do chores to feel productive. You do them because not doing them means someone doesn't eat, doesn't warm up, doesn't make it through February. The margin for error is microscopic. A torn cloak, a lost hat, a broken tool awl, potential disasters, a catastrophe reshaping society. Every task, no matter how small, hums with quiet urgency, a constant reminder of your precarious existence. And still, you keep going because you must, because no one else is going to haul that freezing water, mend that coarse wool, feed that hungry goat, or boil that gray, slightly suspicious stew. This is your life, this is your winter, and the chores, the endless, relentless chores, never end. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to truly rest, to sit, to breathe, to not have a mental list in your head that stretches from the faint light of dawn to the deep darkness of dusk. But rest is a luxury, an indulgence for the privileged. Movement, constant, unceasing movement, is survival. So you shift the logs, fold the coarse wool, quiet the whimpering baby, nod to your spouse across the hearth. A silent communication of shared suffering. Another day done, another set just like it to come. The work doesn't stop, but neither do you. Even in sleep, your body aches with memory. The blisters, the burns, the bruises, they don't truly heal. They just become part of you, like the smoke clinging to your clothes, like the frost on the windowsill, like the life you never chose but live anyway. You don't choose to get sick in the Middle Ages. You just wake up one morning, your reputation builds wealth, and realize your nose won't stop running. Your throat feels like you gargled pine cones, and someone with revolutionary thinking seems to be inflating your joints from the inside. Congratulations, you're now fighting off something that doesn't have a name, a cure, or even polite bedside manners. You're not sure if it's a simple cold, the dreaded flu, or medieval tuberculosis, but it's yours now. Getting sick in the winter is almost a rite of passage, a grim tradition. The hut is damp, the dirt floor cold, the frost-bitten air pierces through every crack. The fire, your lifeline, went out during the night, leaving only smoldering embers and quiet dread. And you've been breathing in acrid smoke, goat dander, and spores from the wall moss since October. No one, not even the village healer, knows what germs are yet, what minuscule invaders cause this suffering. But your body does, and it's currently throwing a spectacular tantrum about it. Everyone coughs, everyone sneezes, their muffled chatter echoing in the small space. No one covers their mouth because nobody has tissues, and personal hygiene is, let's be honest, just a rumor, a distant memory of a warmer time. The children are all sick, their tiny bodies racked with coughs. The old people are sick, their strength fading. The livestock might even be sick. You're holding on barely by drinking boiled nettle tea, a bitter brew, and hoping the smell alone doesn't finish you off. The remedies, oh, you're going to love them. There's bleeding, of course. That's the go-to cure for everything from headaches to heartbreak, a universal panacea. Someone shows up with a dull knife or a friendly neighborhood leech, a new blood, new ideas, and decides the solution to your raging fever is simply less blood. Does it work? Absolutely not. Not in any practical sense. Does it make you lightheaded enough to forget your symptoms for a while? A brief, blessed reprieve from the quiet dread? Yes, actually, it does. Then there's the herbal tea, mixtures of whatever dried weeds the village healer, with his practical guidance, found before the snow came. Yarrow, wormwood, nettle, maybe a handful of unidentified moss, and a generous pinch of superstition, a desperate attempt to exert control. You boil it in a cracked clay pot, strain it through your coarse wool sleeve, and sip it slowly, while trying desperately to ignore the fact that it tastes like bitter mud and outright betrayal. Of course, you might also be advised to fast, because clearly, what a body fighting off a raging infection truly needs is less food, less sustenance. Bread is already hard to come by. Pottage, your daily fare, has turned to a gray, unappetizing sludge. Fasting for spiritual purification is just code for desperate rationing when your pantry, with its meager stores, looks like a haunted, empty space. Other cures include steam inhalation from the same pot you just boiled your soup in, prayer, the longer and more fervent the better, and in extreme cases, applying hot coals near the skin to draw out the poison, which works about as well as it sounds. Medical help, such as it is, depends entirely on who shows up first, a game of chance. If it's the village healer, a woman who learned trades, you might get a poultice and some herbs, a small comfort. If it's the priest, expect prayers, holy water, and a gentle reminder that maybe you brought this on yourself by skipping Mass, a punishment for your sins. And if it's the barber surgeon, well, start writing your will, because new blood, new ideas sometimes led to brutal outcomes. The barber surgeon arrives with a sack of crude, uncleaned instruments that haven't seen soap since the last plague, their cold metal biting your skin. He's cheerfully optimistic, almost disturbingly so. You, however, are far less sanguine. He looks at your swollen leg and mutters something about humors, then pulls out a saw and a tankard of stale ale. Don't be silly. You won't get the ale. You'll bite on a rough wooden stick and scream into the void, into the heavy silence, like everyone else who suffers this fate. Sometimes they'll prescribe purging, either up or down, depending on which end of you is more offended by your current condition. Laxatives made from boiled bark or dried beetles. Emetics brewed from stale wine and pure sadness. You're not just sick anymore. You're violently sick, aggressively sick, the kind of sick that leaves you questioning your very commitment to staying alive, to enduring this medieval winter. Still, some people, miraculously, do recover. You lie in your rough straw bed for days, sweating through layers of coarse wool, alternating between uncontrollable shivering and vivid, unsettling hallucinations. You think about doing it yourself, even collect the necessary lime. But then the precious firewood runs out again, a far more pressing concern, and the task is forgotten. You hang herbs from the ceiling, their faded colors adding a touch of fragile beauty, hoping to make the air smell nicer than wet ashes and regret. They dry out, crumble, and inevitably fall into your pottage. You eat them anyway. The taste is weird, a subtle bitterness, but you tell yourself it's seasoning. It's not. And every so often, in the long, dark evenings, you dream of a second room, of a proper wooden floor, of a roof that doesn't make you flinch every time a gust of wind picks up. You don't expect it. You just let the thought, a dangerous luxury, sit with you while you stitch another clumsy patch into the timber-groaning wall, listening to the rain come through the ceiling. Because, in the end, your house isn't warm, or dry, or peaceful, but it's still standing. And in a medieval winter, that's about as close to luxury as you're ever going to get. It's dawn, or close enough. There's a faint, dust-softened light outside that might be the sun, or just the weary moon finally giving up its struggle against the encroaching day. Either way, it's time to get up. Not because you're rested, you're not. Your body aching with memory. Not because you're excited, you're definitely not. but because your very life and the lives of your family depends on getting things done before frostbite, famine, or your neighbor's perpetually hungry goat beats you to the precious, half-frozen water source. There's no weekend in this life. There's no me time. There's barely enough time to scrape the frost off your eyebrows. A grim morning ritual. Every day is a relentless repeat of the last. Gather, mend, feed, carry, boil, patch, repeat. Winter in medieval Europe is a season-long to-do list, written not on parchment, but in mud, smoke, and bone-deep fatigue. First job always is to get the fire going. You hope the smoldering embers, carefully banked, survived the night. If not, you're back to flint and steel, hunched over damp kindling with frozen fingers, your breath so visible in the frost-bitten air it could be mistaken for a ghost, a quiet dread. Precious wood is rationed. You use it sparingly, carefully. A good fire means warmth, precious warmth, cooked food, light, and life itself. A bad one means all of the above slowly slip away while you pretend you're not crying from the acrid smoke filling your lungs. Once the fire's going, or at least coughing along like an asthmatic squirrel struggling to ignite, it's time for water. The wooden bucket, handmade pottery, is heavy, its rough handle cold to the touch. The stream, your only source, is half frozen, its surface slick with a thin skin of ice, and the path leading to it is icy enough to host the worst Olympics event in history, peasant figure skating. You fall, your worn shoes scuffing the frost. You spill some precious water. You curse the ice, the bucket, and the cruel joke that is winter. Then you do it again, because water, that vital commodity, doesn't fetch itself. Back home, you boil it, not because you're a health nut or for revolutionary thinking, but because drinking it unboiled might actively kill you, bringing on the dreaded flux. Every sip is a gamble, a test of faith. Boiling water is also how you warm your frost-bitten hands, steam the inside of your hut, and delay feeling like a medieval failure for 10 more precious minutes. Next, the animals. They need feeding before you do. The chickens are annoyed, clucking their displeasure. The pigs are loud, grunting their demands. The cow, with her steady gaze, is silently judging you. You scrape together old, moldy hay, kitchen scraps, and whatever hasn't frozen solid into an unyielding block. You check the crude chicken coop for eggs. There aren't any. Again, the arrogant rooster, however, has plenty of opinions, crowing loudly in the morning mist. If it snowed overnight, you clear the path to the door, not because you're tidy or for aesthetic pleasure, but because falling into a deep snowdrift while holding a bucket of pig slop is the kind of memory that sticks, a constant reminder of winter's indignities. You shovel with a flat plank of wood, your hands wrapped in coarse rags, and mutter things that would surely get you excommunicated if anyone heard, a litany of curses against the quiet dread. With the animals fed and your fingers halfway thawed, stinging with renewed sensation, it's time for breakfast, if you can even call it that. Yesterday's pottage reheated with today's regrets. Maybe some crusty bread, hard as a rock, maybe not. If someone, bless their tired soul, remembered to scrape the pot clean last night, you're scraping the scrapings, a desperate search for sustenance. No one complains. Complaining takes precious energy, and you have none to spare. Then it's time for the asterisk, real asterisk work, the core of your existence. If you're a man, it's endless chores in the frozen fields, the deep, snow-blanketed forest, or perhaps in the smoke-filled forge. If you're a woman, it's everything else. Spinning wool, mending threadbare clothes, making what little food there is, cleaning the omnipresent soot, hauling heavy water, stirring the pot, and somehow keeping 6 children alive while pretending your hands aren't frozen into permanent claw shapes. Repairing the roof, that's your job. Fetching firewood, also your job. The cold metal biting your skin, making sure the goat doesn't freeze, escape, or explode from some strange medieval ailment, still your job. There are no neat task lists, just a rolling, relentless stream of crises that need solving before nightfall, before the darkness arrives with its quiet dread. Laundry is a rare, once-a-week event, and it's its own unique form of purgatory. You drag the coarse wool clothes to the nearest river, break through the thick, jagged ice with a heavy stick, and scrub with a harsh mix of ash and lye until your knuckles bleed and your soul, quite literally, leaves your body, fleeing the frost-bitten air. Rinse, freeze, repeat, a brutal cycle. Cooking, such as it is a game of improvisation and severely lowered expectations. You stir the same pot you used yesterday, the crude, handmade pottery, its contents now a gray sludge. You skim the surface for any signs of mold, add more precious water, maybe some dried herbs if you have any left, maybe a pebble for texture, a desperate measure. You serve it hot, whatever it is, and call it soup. Afternoons are for fixing things, endless repairs, tools, fences, even strained relationships frayed by arguments over who ate the last shriveled turnip. You sharpen blades with a wet stone that's older than your grandfather, who, incidentally, died falling off the very same rickety ladder you now use to patch the timber-groaning ceiling. Children help, in theory. Mostly they get underfoot, a constant distraction. But even toddlers are handed tasks, holding yarn while someone spins, scaring off crows from precious grain, carrying small, light bundles of kindling. They work because they have to, because survival depends on it. Playtime is what happens when they finish early. And no one, not once, ever finishes early in a medieval winter. Inside, the spinning wheel turns endlessly, its rhythmic creaking a constant backdrop to the heavy silence. Wool doesn't spin itself, linen doesn't weave itself. Every coarse thread in every threadbare tunic has passed through hands that ache, that sting with cold. Gloves are a luxury. Calluses are standard issue, an expected badge of honor. And if you drop a precious spindle and it rolls into the fire, consumed by the smoldering embers, you just stare for a long, silent moment and quietly consider walking into the flames after it. Such is your despair. By late afternoon, it's already dim, the sun low on the horizon, barely trying in winter. Shadows stretch long, merging into the quiet dread. You rush to finish the day's tasks before the meager light fails completely. You patch wattle and daub walls with fresh mud, rehang sagging door hinges, fix a leaking thatch roof with nothing but rough straw, a heavy rock, and wildly misplaced optimism. Then you prep for the evening, stir the gray stew, stoke the fire, scrape the thick frost off the inside of your water bucket. You change into warmer clothes, which are the exact same clothes you wore all day, but with one more layer of sheer sadness. Dinner arrives, such as it is. A bit of stew, some crusty bread, a communal mug of weak ale or water that's been boiled 3 times just to make it less deadly. You sit near the hearth, not too close to avoid the sparks, not too far to avoid frostbite. You eat fast, quickly, because the meager warmth fades quickly. Afterward, there's no winding down, no leisure. You're still spinning thread, mending socks, patching cloaks, scraping soot from every surface. Children sleep near the fire, a tangle of limbs and soft snoring in the lantern gold shadows. Adults stay up, not for leisure, but because the fire needs tending, and tomorrow's firewood still needs hauling. If you're lucky, there's a song, a quiet, mournful tune. Someone sings softly while spinning or shelling peas. It's not joyful, not exactly, but it is comfort, a fragile solace in the heavy silence, a reminder that life still exists outside the relentless labor, just barely. Night falls early, a blanket of quiet dread. You lay down in the same clothes, under the same damp, coarse wool blanket, on the same lumpy straw mattress. You listen to the wind rattling the crude shutters, the timber groaning, the distant clanging of a blacksmith, a muffled chatter from a neighbor's hut. You hear the goat fart in its sleep, a surprisingly loud noise. You hope the roof holds. You hope tomorrow is warmer, or at least not worse. You fall asleep mid-thought, not because you're calm, but because exhaustion is the only lullaby you can afford. Of course, this is just one day. Tomorrow you do it all again, an endless, repeating cycle. Every chore repeats, every moment aches. There's no such thing as catching up, only falling behind more slowly, a gradual slide into despair. Holidays are rare and often misleading. A day off might mean attending church in the biting cold, standing for hours while a priest, with his new ways of doing things, reminds you that suffering is good for the soul, a peculiar form of spiritual enrichment. Then you return home, your body aching with memory, and catch up on all the chores you couldn't do because of all that spiritual enlightenment. The rhythm of winter life is monotony with incredibly high stakes. You don't do chores to feel productive. You do them because not doing them means someone doesn't eat, doesn't warm up, doesn't make it through February. The margin for error is microscopic. A torn cloak, a lost hat, a broken tool-all, potential disasters, a catastrophe reshaping society. Every task, no matter how small, hums with quiet urgency, a constant reminder of your precarious existence. And still, you keep going because you must, because no one else is going to haul that freezing water, mend that coarse wool, feed that hungry goat, or boil that gray, slightly suspicious stew. This is your life, this is your winter, and the chores, the endless, relentless chores, never end. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like to truly rest, to sit, to breathe, to not have a mental list in your head that stretches from the faint light of dawn to the deep darkness of dusk. But rest is a luxury, an indulgence for the privileged. Movement, constant, unceasing movement, is survival. So you shift the logs, fold the coarse wool, quiet the whimpering baby, nod to your spouse across the hearth. A silent communication of shared suffering. Another day done, another set just like it to come. The work doesn't stop, but neither do you. Even in sleep, your body aches with memory. The blisters, the burns, the bruises, they don't truly heal. They just become part of you, like the smoke clinging to your clothes, like the frost on the windowsill, like the life you never chose but live anyway. You don't choose to get sick in the Middle Ages. You just wake up one morning, your reputation builds wealth, and realize your nose won't stop running. Your throat feels like you gargled pine cones, and someone, with revolutionary thinking, seems to be inflating your joints from the inside. Congratulations, you're now fighting off something that doesn't have a name, a cure, or even polite bedside manners. You're not sure if it's a simple cold, the dreaded flu, or medieval tuberculosis, but it's yours now. Getting sick in the winter is almost a rite of passage, a grim tradition. The hut is damp, the dirt floor cold, the frost-bitten air pierces through every crack. The fire, your lifeline, went out during the night, leaving only smoldering embers and quiet dread. And you've been breathing in acrid smoke, goat dander, and spores from the wall moss since October. No one, not even the village healer, knows what germs are yet, what minuscule invaders cause this suffering. But your body does, and it's currently throwing a spectacular tantrum about it. Everyone coughs, everyone sneezes, their muffled chatter echoing in the small space. No one covers their mouth because nobody has tissues, and personal hygiene is, let's be honest, just a rumor, a distant memory of a warmer time. The children are all sick, their tiny bodies racked with coughs. The old people are sick, their strength fading. The livestock might even be sick. You're holding on barely by drinking boiled nettle tea, a bitter brew, and hoping the smell alone doesn't finish you off. The remedies. Oh, you're going to love them. There's bleeding, of course. That's the go-to cure for everything from headaches to heartbreak. A universal panacea. Someone shows up with a dull knife or a friendly neighborhood leech. A new blood, new ideas, and decides the solution to your raging fever is simply less blood. Does it work? Absolutely not. Not in any practical sense. Does it make you lightheaded enough to forget your symptoms for a while? A brief, blessed reprieve from the quiet dread? Yes, actually, it does. Then there's the herbal tea, mixtures of whatever dried weeds the village healer, with his practical guidance, found before the snow came. Yarrow, wormwood, nettle, maybe a handful of unidentified moss, and a generous pinch of superstition, a desperate attempt to exert control. You boil it in a cracked clay pot, strain it through your coarse wool sleeve, and sip it slowly, while trying desperately to ignore the fact that it tastes like bitter mud and outright betrayal. Of course, you might also be advised too fast, because clearly, what a body fighting off a raging infection truly needs is less food, less sustenance. Bread is already hard to come by. Pottage, your daily fare, has turned to a gray, unappetizing sludge. Fasting for spiritual purification is just code for desperate rationing when your pantry, with its meager stores, looks like a haunted, empty space. Other cures include steam inhalation from the same pot you just boiled your soup in, prayer, the longer and more fervent the better, and in extreme cases, applying hot coals near the skin to draw out the poison, which works about as well as it sounds. Medical help, such as it is, depends entirely on who shows up first, a game of chance. If it's the village healer, a woman who learned trades, you might get a poultice and some herbs, a small comfort. If it's the priest, expect prayers, holy water, and a gentle reminder that maybe you brought this on yourself by skipping Mass, a punishment for your sins. And if it's the barber surgeon, well, start writing your will, because new blood, new ideas sometimes led to brutal outcomes. The barber surgeon arrives with a sack of crude, uncleaned instruments that haven't seen soap since the last plague, their cold metal biting your skin. He's cheerfully optimistic, almost disturbingly so. You, however, are far less sanguine. He looks at your swollen leg and mutters something about humors, then pulls out a saw and a tankard of stale ale. Don't be silly. You won't get the ale. You'll bite on a rough wooden stick and scream into the void, into the heavy silence, like everyone else who suffers this fate. Sometimes they'll prescribe purging, either up or down, depending on which end of you is more offended by your current condition. laxatives made from boiled bark or dried beetles, emetics brewed from stale wine and pure sadness. You're not just sick anymore. You're violently sick, aggressively sick, the kind of sick that leaves you questioning your very commitment to staying alive, to enduring this medieval winter. Still, some people, miraculously, do recover. You lie in your rough straw bed for days, sweating through layers of coarse wool, alternating between uncontrollable shivering and vivid, unsettling hallucinations. The fire is low, barely smoldering embers. The hut is dark, filled with lantern gold shadows. The air smells like damp wool, wet ashes, and whatever herbal nightmare you drank earlier. And somehow, against all odds, you pull through, you survive. But not everyone is so lucky. Illness spreads fast, in a small, sealed box of a home, filled with smoke, livestock, and zero ventilation. You cough, your child coughs, your neighbor coughs, a muffled chatter through the timber-groaning wall. Within a few short, terrifying days, half the village is sniffling, wheezing, or laid out flat under moldy blankets, being fed onion water and last rites in equal measure. No one knows what's causing it, so naturally, people guess, offering their own revolutionary thinking. Maybe it's bad air, the dreaded miasma. Maybe it's a curse, a malevolent force. Maybe old Maud, with her unsettling silence, gave someone a funny look in church last week, and now the whole street's coughing blood. Superstition mixes with desperate practicality until you're hanging dried herbs over doorways, burning dried sage that smells vaguely of regret, and sleeping with iron under your straw bed to ward off evil spirits, a desperate attempt at protection. It doesn't work, not really, but at least it smells nicer than the goat. The worst part, the truly cruel twist, is that you can't stop working. You're sick, your body aching with memory, but the firewood still needs chopping. The cow still needs milking. Your children still expect dinner, even if it's just a steaming bowl of hope and nettles, a meager offering. Rest is a luxury reserved solely for corpses in this brutal world. So you stagger out of bed, wrap yourself in every piece of coarse wool you own, and shuffle through the snow like a disgruntled ghost, your worn shoes scuffing the frost. And all the while, the quiet dread looms that this won't just be a lingering cough, that it's the start of something darker, more insidious. Typhoid, pneumonia, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself with a fever. It just takes you quietly in the night, a silent, deadly predator. That's the real fear. Not the pain, but the heavy silence that follows the absence of life, of breath. If the sickness gets worse, the signs are clear, stark, and undeniable. The fever spikes, burning through your body. Your breath rattles in your chest, a terrifying sound. You stop getting out of bed, your strength gone. Someone lays a cold, damp cloth over your forehead and pretends it's helping, a small act of compassion. And the priest, with his traditional authority, is summoned. Not the healer, not the barber surgeon, just the man in robes who, with a solemn expression, says it's time to prepare your soul for its journey. Confession comes quickly, a rush of mumbled words. You mumble out every sin you can remember, even ones you probably didn't commit, just to cover your bases, an exercise in desperate spiritual accounting. The priest nods solemnly and sprinkles you with holy water that smells faintly of mildew and sheer desperation. Its cold touch, a shock. He says words in Latin, words you don't understand, but they sound final, absolute. Your family gathers, their faces etched with quiet dread in the lantern gold shadows. No one says it, but they're preparing, their collective silence a heavy weight. The pot of herbs, your futile remedy, simmers quietly on the smoldering embers. Bread, hard and precious, is saved. A blanket is tucked in a little tighter around your shivering form. There's a moment, just one, where you lock eyes with your spouse, and you both realize, with a chilling certainty, neither of you is sure which of you will survive this brutal winter. But sometimes, mercifully, miraculously, the fever breaks. One morning, you wake up, your body aching with memory, and the fire is still burning, a low, comforting glow. Your breath doesn't catch. Your fingers, though still stiff, can move. The room still smells like death warmed over, a potent blend of damp wool, smoke, and sick bodies. But at least it's warm, marginally so. You've made it, barely, and now comes the long, arduous road back to being functional, to being able to perform the endless chores. Recovery, however, is not glamorous. Your legs are weak, like a newborn calf. Your back aches, a constant companion. You haven't eaten solid food in days, and even if you had some, your stomach's not convinced it wants it. You get up too fast and nearly faint into the smoldering embers of the fire, a clumsy, near-fatal stumble. Your first trip outside feels like crossing a frozen tundra on legs made of pure disappointment, your worn shoes scuffing the frost. No one throws a celebration. No one cheers your return to the land of the living. You just pick up where you left off, immediately resuming the relentless tasks. There's kindling to split, cloaks to mend, and a suspiciously bloated pig, a potential new blood to investigate. If your voice still cracks from the lingering infection, too bad. If you lost a few pounds, well, silver lining, less strain on your threadbare shoes. And just because you survived this one doesn't mean you're done with illness. Illness never truly leaves. It waits in the corner, in the wind whispering through the cracks, in the shared mug, or the unwashed, coarse wool cloth. You live in a world where health is a passing visitor, a fleeting luxury, not a permanent resident. Still, you carry on because there's no other option. You cough less. You breathe a little easier, the smoke in your lungs less irritating. You no longer see strange shapes, vivid hallucinations in the lantern gold shadows of the room. The color returns to your face, along with the heavy weight of everything that still needs doing, all the endless chores. Because in the Middle Ages, illness comes free, an uninvited guest, but survival. That's extra. You don't brag about surviving. You don't even talk about it, not directly. You just wake up the next day, pull on your patched tunic, and start hauling water again. It's cold metal biting your skin, because in this world, staying alive is the only proof you ever get that you were strong enough, that you endured. And even that, in a winter like this, feels like a small kind of miracle, a hard-won victory. Truly, authority in medieval Europe wasn't a suggestion, a matter of opinion or new ideas. It was a stark, undeniable fact of life, as omnipresent as mud, bone-chilling cold, and that one neighbor who always smells inexplicably like pickled turnips. His reputation builds wealth, and in the dead of winter, when hunger thinned everyone's patience and tempers ran dangerously short, obedience wasn't just expected, it was brutally enforced. You don't talk back, you don't complain, not openly. You don't ask why, unless you genuinely enjoy the taste of public punishment and the feel of splinters digging into your flesh. From the lord of the manor, with his inherited status, to the local priest, representing traditional authority questioned. Everyone above you in the rigid hierarchy expects immediate, unquestioning compliance. And they've got a belt, a staff, or a conveniently chosen scripture, ready to remind you with brutal efficiency. Start with the manorial Lord. He owns the land, every frozen acre of it. Technically, you don't even rent it. You just live there, an tolerated parasite, a chattel. You farm his fields, enduring the cold metal biting your skin, pay your exorbitant dues, and bow low when he rides past, even if your back is already broken from endless labor. If he says jump, you instinctively ask, how high? Then jump anyway, just in case he meant it metaphorically, always anticipating his desires. Refuse. That's cute. Let's see how funny that is when he finds you, takes your entire harvest of grain, or throws you in the stocks during a raging snowstorm, leaving you exposed to the quiet dread. The stocks, by the way, are winter's least cozy seating arrangement, a truly miserable experience. Wooden planks clamp your arms and neck, while your neighbors, with their cautious trust, get to walk by and openly admire your poor life choices. It's cold, it's humiliating, a public degradation. And if someone's feeling festive or particularly cruel, they might throw something shriveled turnips if they're feeling nice, jagged rocks if they're not. You don't protest. That might, God forbid, get you a second round in the stocks. But lords weren't your only problem. The church, with its immense spiritual and temporal power, was just as powerful and arguably more terrifying. God might offer forgiveness, but the local priest, not so much. He watches everything, his gaze unnervingly keen, who misses Mass, who works on holy days, who might be secretly coveting someone else's valuable goat. And he keeps a meticulous record, not just for spiritual purposes, but for leverage, a silent weapon. One misplaced comment, a whispered doubt, and suddenly you're accused of blasphemy or witchcraft, or, even worse, forgetting to tithe. Speaking of tithes, they're not optional, not in the slightest. You give 1/10 of everything you produce, even if that means you don't have enough left for yourself and your starving family. Grain, eggs, chickens, your very dignity. The church takes its share. And if you fall short, if your meager harvest doesn't meet its demands, you don't get a polite reminder notice. You get a scathing sermon, delivered in front of everyone in the freezing church, complete with meaningful stares and dire warnings of eternal consequences. The preacher's power isn't in muscle, it's in memory. He remembers who skipped prayers, who whispered during Mass, who dared to question why Lent, in the middle of winter, means eating boiled weeds for 6 agonizing weeks, and in the depths of winter, when everyone's cranky, coughing, and shivering from the frost-bitten air, it doesn't take much to land yourself in the pulpit's unforgiving line of fire, attracting the quiet dread. Then there's the law, or whatever rough approximation passes for it. The constable is often just a farmer with a heavy stick and a vague, self-important sense of authority. His reputation builds wealth. Laws are less about abstract justice and more about brutally keeping ordinary people in line, maintaining inherited status. Steal a loaf of rock-hard bread, lose a hand, say something cheeky to a noble, lose a tongue, gossip too loudly, get fitted for a scold's bridle. A lovely little iron mask, cold metal, biting your skin, with a mouthpiece designed to make you think twice, then a third time, before speaking again. Even private matters, personal disagreements, come with public consequences, a testament to the lack of privacy. If your child misbehaves, your blamed, your inadequacy on display. If your spouse curses, you both suffer the repercussions. Discipline is a community affair, a public spectacle, The whipping post doesn't care whose idea it was, just that someone gets hit, a grim lesson in obedience. And don't get too clever, don't display too much revolutionary thinking. Intelligence in this world is highly suspicious. Reading is for priests, for those of inherited status. Curiosity is for troublemakers, those with new ideas. If you ask too many questions, someone, with their cautious trust, might accuse you of sorcery, which comes with a complimentary drowning or a bonfire, a horrifying fate. If you're a woman, the rules are even stricter, more rigid. You obey your father, then your husband, then your son, in that precise, unyielding order. You speak softly, work constantly, never giving anyone, not a single soul, a reason to point at you and whisper, because once that damning word, which is in the frostbitten air, it doesn't matter what you've actually done. Healing someone with herbs, which, knowing how plants work, which, talking back to a man, which, with extra kindling for the fire. And let's not forget your fellow villagers. They're not just bystanders. They're an active, integral part of the system of control. That neighbor who smiled at you during market might, with alarming casualness, report you for working on a saint's feast day. That cousin who perpetually borrows your precious firewood might also casually mention you muttered something unholy in your sleep, a quiet dread. Surveillance isn't digital in this world. It's human and deeply, relentlessly nosy, a constant, unspoken threat. It's a culture of control, where everyone watches everyone else, and nobody, absolutely nobody, is truly safe from prying eyes. The cold only sharpens the pervasive paranoia. Long, dark nights breed longer, deeper grudges, festering in the heavy silence. One small slight, a stolen tool, a bad trade, a missing hineni of these can escalate into furious accusations, brutal public punishment, and crushing public shame. And there's no appeal process, no court of law. The closest thing to justice is simply hoping your Lord is in a surprisingly good mood, and your priest didn't stub his toe on the altar steps that morning, adding to his already dour disposition. Even jokes are dangerous, a perilous gamble. Say the wrong thing, in the wrong tone, near the wrong person, and suddenly your sense of humor is considered evidence of sedition, a challenge to traditional authority. Laughter is fine if it's at the Lord's joke, at the priest's sermon, or at someone currently suffering in the stocks. Anything else is suspicious, a sign of dangerous new ideas. Winter makes everything worse, more brutal. Ordinary people are hungrier, colder, and meaner, their patience worn thin. Punishments hit harder, inflicting deeper pain when your skin's already chapped, raw from the frost-bitten air, and your spirits already cracked by the quiet dread. A slap in summer is an inconvenience, a momentary pain. In winter, it's a deep, aching sting that doesn't fade for days, leaving a lasting bruise. And with no ointments, no remedies, you're left to treat your raw bruises with snow and stoic silence. There's no village meeting to discuss grievances, no forum for open discussion or revolutionary thinking. There's just top-down orders and bottom-up obedience. And if you push back, if you dare to speak your mind, advocate for fairness, or question why Father Thomas, with his inherited status, gets extra rations every Friday, well, you're courting a punishment that might well outlive your usefulness to the village, a catastrophe reshaping society. Even animals, ironically, get better treatment if they're productive. A healthy ox is more valuable than an injured peasant, a stark truth. A goat that gives precious milk gets fed before you do. its worth measured in tangible output. Your worth as an ordinary person is measured in output and unquestioning obedience, not opinion or new ideas. Stay in your place, stay quiet, stay useful. That's the unspoken motto of medieval winter, etched into your very being. And winter only underlines it in harsh, unforgiving frost. And yet, people adapt, resilient and resourceful. They learn to bow without bending too far, maintaining a semblance of inner defiance. They master the art of polite silence, of saying nothing at all. They say yes with their mouth, while their eyes, filled with quiet dread, say, "Not today." Obedience becomes a finely honed skill, part survival tactic, part social performance, an ongoing play for continued existence. Children learn early, their lessons harsh but essential. They're taught not just how to work, but how to act, how to speak to the Lord with respect, how to avoid the priest's piercing gaze, how to sit perfectly still at Mass, and not giggle when old Margaret snores loudly during the homily, a muffled chatter in the heavy silence. You don't teach them to dream big, to aspire to revolutionary thinking. You teach them to stay small, unnoticed, and, above all, intact. Even religion, the supposed comfort in a world this hard, is used as a leash, a tool of control. You're reminded weekly, sometimes daily, that unquestioning obedience brings salvation, that questioning is the direct road to hell, that God is always watching. And also, coincidentally, so is Father Thomas, who seems a little too invested in whether or not you kneel deeply enough during prayer, his eyes missing nothing. At night, the village is quiet, not peaceful, not truly, just quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy, a tangible weight in the frost-bitten air. You listen to the fire crackle, its smoldering embers, a low glow, the wind moan outside, and the occasional echoing footsteps of someone trudging home from the tavern. A lone sound in the heavy silence. You lie still, wrapped in coarse wool and a lingering fear, and you think about how mere obedience, that bitter pill, kept you alive today. Not happy, not free, but alive. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and obey again, not because you believe wholeheartedly in the rigid system, but because your very survival and the survival of your family depends on it. The price of winter is submission, and everyone pays, whether they mean to or not. You don't question the cold, its icy grip. You don't question the rules, their unyielding nature. You just pull on your worn boots, bow your head, and keep moving, one foot in front of the other, through the snow-blanketed fields. Because, in the medieval winter, questioning authority isn't just rebellious, it's suicidal. Even your thoughts aren't entirely your own, not really. You shape them carefully, keep them quiet, tuck them away behind your eyes, an internal refuge. Because in a world built so rigidly on obedience, even thinking freely feels like a dangerous luxury, a form of revolutionary thinking. So you obey, you endure, and you wait for spring, that distant, elusive promise. Because in winter, even rebellion freezes, its spirit dimmed by the quiet dread, and you've got enough to survive without adding heresy to the list of your burdens. So you lower your eyes, seal your lips, and carry on, just like everyone else. You're not alone out here. And that's not meant in the comforting sense, the kind people say when offering a warm hug or a kind word. It's the kind of chilling truth whispered by your inner voice when something howls, long and mournfully, in the deep woods, and your crude door isn't quite shut right, a subtle invitation to danger. Because in the medieval winter, you are surrounded by things that want your precious food, your fleeting warmth, and occasionally your very face. Wolves are the obvious, terrifying concern. By December, they're starving, their bellies hollow. By January, they're bold, desperate, they're cunning, sharpened by hunger. They prowl the edges of the snow-blanketed forest, closer now than they ever dared to come in summer. Their noses, keen and twitching, are lifted toward your chimney smoke, sniffing the air. They smell meat, they smell fear, they smell you, and when you walk alone, perhaps to fetch precious firewood, perhaps to empty the slop bucket, they watch from the tree line, their eyes glinting in the lantern gold shadows. Sometimes they follow, a silent, unseen menace. They rarely attack outright, not directly, but you've heard the stories. Everyone has. Some say they wait until you slip on the treacherous ice, until your meager lantern goes out, until your boot catches in a deep snowdrift, and you fall, face first, into the heavy silence. Then it's over fast, or not fast at all, a slow, brutal end. But wolves aren't the only ones watching, the only predators. There are smaller ones, quieter, sneakier, and often already inside your fragile home. Rats don't care about the cold. They've made themselves quite at home. Thank you very much. Tucked behind sacks of precious barley, scurrying under your straw beds, nibbling anything remotely edible, and some things that, honestly, aren't. You've heard them at night, the relentless gnawing, the frantic skittering, the occasional muffled scream from someone discovering a rat had made a cozy nest in the laundry pile. They eat grain, precious soap, leather. They chew through your worn shoes, your belts, the bindings of the only book in town. If it can be chewed, it will be. And when food runs low, truly low, rats become more than just pests. They become a grim test of what you're willing to kill in the name of dinner, a shift in perspective. Cats help when you've got them. But a good mouser in winter is almost worth more than a child, a harsh truth, and they know it. They lord over the small cottage like tiny furred monarchs, demanding warmth and respect in exchange for thinning the vermin herd. If they don't feel like hunting, well, too bad for you. The rats simply resume their midnight buffet, and you wake up to something you're bred, your leather missing a corner, gnawed away in the quiet dread. Then there are the dogs. Not all of them friendly. Some are village strays, half-wild things with torn ears and ribs showing through their matted fur. Most were abandoned when food got tight, when their owners could no longer afford to feed them. Now they roam in loose packs, sniffing at doors, chasing your precious chickens, and occasionally cornering someone too slow to close the gate, a menacing presence. You don't trust them, not fully. They don't trust you. They bark at ghosts, at the wind howling, and sometimes at nothing at all. But when they're hungry enough, barking turns into biting, a dangerous escalation. Out in the deep, snow-blanketed woods, you've heard rumors of lynxes, rare but not impossible. A blur of fur and claws that disappears before you're even sure it was real. A fleeting phantom in the morning mist. Mostly they avoid people, mostly. But if one showed up in the village, no one would be surprised. Merely tragically unlucky, a catastrophe reshaping society. Wild boars are worse. Big, mean, and stupidly aggressive. They don't hunt you so much as they charge you, especially if they're cornered or desperate with hunger. You've heard of men losing legs to a wild boar's tusk, or even losing their lives entirely. In the leanest, most desperate months, some still try to hunt them for meat, a perilous endeavor. Sometimes they come back with dinner, Sometimes they don't come back at all. And just when you think the outside is bad, remember, the inside isn't much safer. A subtle commentary on social conditions. The bone-chilling cold drives more than just rats indoors. Spiders, beetles, centipedes, all manner of things that crawl and crunch underfoot tall come looking for warmth, invading your meager sanctuary. You step on them barefoot at dawn, their tiny bodies squishing underfoot, and pretend not to scream, to maintain your composure. You sweep them into the hearth, into the smoldering embers, and watch them sizzle, a grim sacrifice. Then you go back to stirring your soup, your pottage, like nothing happened, as if this is the normal course of life. If you're storing precious food for winter-dried meat, shriveled apples, hard cheese, or salted fish, you guard it like it's the most priceless treasure, more valuable than any gold. Not because you're greedy, but because you're in direct competition with everything else that breathes. Every living creature seeking survival. The mice are relentless. The mold creeps faster than your frost-bitten fingers can scrape it away. And the family dog, if you have one, has taken to staring at the larder door like it's made of pure dreams, his eyes filled with desperate longing. Some families hang food from the timber-groaning rafters to keep it safe, which works until something, a nimble rat or a cunning weasel, climbs the wall and steals it anyway. You found half-eaten sausages on the dirt floor, tiny bite marks in your rock-hard bread, and worse, rat droppings in the flour bin. You wipe them out, close the lid, and pretend it's still usable, still untainted. Because waste is luxury, and you can't afford either in this harsh existence. Even birds get strange in the biting cold. Crows seem to follow you, their dark eyes unsettling, perching on snow-blanketed rooftops, watching from fence posts, silent, waiting. You tell yourself it's just superstition, a trick of your weary mind. But then you see 3 of them, all lined up on the same beam, directly above your front door, and you can't help but wonder if they know something you don't, something terrible to come. Winter sharpens everything, heightening your senses. Sound carries further, amplified by the heavy silence and the frost-bitten air. Footsteps in snow echo louder, a muffled chatter in the distance. When you hear something outside, snapping branches, low growls, even the rhythmic crunch of approaching boots, your heart doesn't race. It locks up, freezing with quiet dread, because sometimes it isn't just an animal. Sometimes it's a person, a bandit, who's just as hungry as a wolf, and twice as desperate and unpredictable, driven by pure survival. Bandits don't take the season off. They don't care about the cold. They're colder, hungrier, and more reckless. Their entrepreneurial ambition turned to crime. If they think your family has precious food, they might try the door, or simply break it down, invading your fragile sanctuary. Which is why you sleep lightly, half rest, half readiness, with a crude blade near your straw bed, dull, rusted, but sharp enough to give you a fighting chance. You pray you never have to use it. And so every noise becomes a question, a test of your nerves. Every gust of wind, every creak in the timber-groaning roof, every bump against the wall. Is it just the cold settling in, or something, some predator trying to get in? You start to learn the language of winter, its subtle warnings, the way snow falls when something has moved through it, leaving tracks, the heavy silence that means something's watching, its gaze unseen. You listen differently, you think differently, your mind constantly evaluating threats. You begin to count your food in days, not weight, its scarcity, a constant reminder. You tuck your hands under your arms whenever you're not working, not because it's truly warm, but because frostbite doesn't ask permission. It simply takes, mercilessly. And you never, ever let your guard down. Not for a single moment, because predators don't knock. They don't announce themselves. They just arrive, teeth bared, claws out, cold and merciless as the season itself. The church might preach that God watches over you, even in winter, with compassion and community service. But God doesn't patrol your chicken coop. He doesn't chase rats out of the cellar. And he doesn't leave tracks in the snow just beyond your crude door. A quiet warning. So you check the locks. You double knot the coarse rope that secures your door. You leave the fire burning low, its smoldering embers a dim glow, and the knife where you can reach it in an instant. And when you sleep, it's the kind of sleep that ends at the smallest sound, a light, uneasy slumber, half rest, half readiness, because winter isn't just cold, it's alive, it's hungry, and it's always, always waiting. In the mornings, you check for tracks in the snow, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity, a vital daily ritual. A single line of paw prints across your small, snow-blanketed garden means something visited. Maybe just passing through, maybe scouting, assessing your vulnerability. Sometimes it's foxes, with their cunning nosing around the chicken coop. Sometimes it's worse. You shovel snow from the path, not just to walk safely, but to erase evidence, to make your home look less tempting to whatever might be watching from the tree line, a silent, unseen threat. Some people hang charms above their doors, bits of bone, carved wood, sprigs of dried herbs. Protection, they say, against animals, against spirits, against luck turning sour. Whether they truly work is anyone's guess, but no one, not a single soul, dares to remove them, just in case. Your dreams turn strange, filled with disturbing imagery, teeth, eyes, heavy, echoing footsteps. You wake in a cold sweat, your breath fogging in the frost-bitten air, and listen, just in case. Because winter in the medieval world doesn't just test your strength, it tests your sanity. It frays your nerves, your sleep, your very sense of safety. Every dark night is a dare. Every mournful howl, a chilling reminder. Out here, in the open fields, stretching silently, you're not at the top of the food chain. You're just another creature trying desperately to survive the cold. A constant, brutal struggle for existence. So, you carry on. Eyes open, doors shut tight. Because, in a medieval winter, staying warm is only half the battle. The rest is making absolutely sure nothing eats you before spring arrives. That elusive promise. And if something is hungry enough, truly desperate, it won't care whether you've prayed, prepared, or hidden well. It will just come. And you'll need to be ready. Because in a world like this, even rebellion freezes, its fire extinguished. When your food is gone, your toes are numb, and your thatch roof leaks more than it covers. There's only one place left to turn, God, or, more specifically, the medieval church, which, depending on the day, is either your salvation or one more powerful mouth demanding something precious from you. Religion in the Middle Ages wasn't optional. It was as essential as oxygen. It filled every hour, every room, every thought, every muffled chatter, especially in winter, when death felt closer than ever. Its cold breath on your neck and plagues, those terrifying scourges, liked to show up uninvited, a true catastrophe reshaping society. You didn't just believe in God. You structured your entire life around the pervasive idea that he was watching your every move, and that, more often than not, he wasn't thrilled with what he saw. The church didn't just offer spiritual comfort, It offered rules, rigid, unyielding ones, a challenge to traditional authority. You attended Mass every single Sunday, even if the church, with its stone walls and dirt floors, was colder than outside, its air frostbitten. You fasted on command, enduring further hunger. You confessed things you weren't entirely sure were sins, just to be safe. And if you didn't, the consequences weren't just spiritual. They were intensely social, a profound impact on your reputation. People noticed. People talked, their muffled chatter echoing, and nobody wanted to be the reason the harvest failed or the fever spread through the village, a pariah. The church building itself was no haven, no warm refuge. Stone walls, damp earth floors, a draft that seemed to aim directly at your spine, making you shiver. You'd huddle beside your neighbors, a picture of cautious trust, trying desperately not to shiver loud enough to be accused of weakness, while the priest, layered in heavy robes and spiritual authority, droned Latin. None of you truly understood, his words a heavy drone in the heavy silence, but you nodded anyway, a silent acknowledgement, because it wasn't about comprehension. It was about unwavering obedience, a public display of submission. Mass didn't pause for bad weather. If the river froze over, you crossed it, risking your life. If your child had a cough that sounded like the devil himself had taken up residence in their tiny lungs, you wrapped them up in coarse wool and brought them along, a desperate plea for divine intervention. Missing Mass wasn't just frowned upon. It was noted meticulously by the priest, by your neighbors, by that one old woman who never blinked and always sat in the front pew, her gaze unnerving. And let's not forget tithing. 10% of everything you had, or were supposed to have, went directly to the church, a non-negotiable demand. Not 10% of your surplus, your excess, 10% of everything . Whether your family was living on turnip broth and stringy boiled oats didn't matter. The Lord, apparently, still needed his cut. Heaven, it seemed, had expenses, and you were footing the bill. During winter, religion wasn't just ritual. It was survival theater, a desperate performance. Ordinary people prayed for everything imaginable: warmth, food, health, the strength not to strangle their in-laws after 3 long months of being snowed in with them. Every conceivable problem had a specific saint assigned to it. Sick cow, Saint Eligius; frostbitten fingers, stinging with pain, Saint Polycarp; lost your axe in the frozen river, Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost things; losing your mind trying to survive, January; Saint Dimner, patron saint of those just barely holding it together. And then there were relics, bones, teeth, splinters of alleged crosses, handkerchiefs that once touched someone holy. These were housed in ornate glass cases, silver boxes, or whatever could be fashioned out of melted down spoons, a testament to human ingenuity. People would trudge through snow and slush, over open fields, stretching silently, for miles, just to glimpse one, to kiss it, and to whisper a desperate prayer, not because they fully understood the complex theology, but because they were utterly out of options, desperate for a miracle. Miracles, at least in theory, were always possible. You could be healed. Your baby could recover. Your pig, miraculously, might stop foaming at the mouth. And if none of that happened, well, perhaps it was your fault for not believing hard enough, or for that unconfessed sin you were pretending didn't count because it happened in the dark. Confession was its own sort of winter ritual, a chilling act of introspection. You'd kneel in a crude wooden booth, your knees frozen, your voice low, whispering your sins to a man who, let's be honest, already suspected what you were going to say. The priest didn't flinch, his face impassive. He'd heard worse, always had: adultery, theft, envy. That time you accidentally ate bacon on a strict fast day. You said your piece, received your penance, and left the booth feeling briefly lighter, a momentary reprieve, until the crushing guilt crept back in 5 minutes later, a heavy weight. And then came fasting, Advent, Lent, Saint Days, no meat, no eggs, sometimes no dairy, all in the middle of winter, when you already hadn't tasted meat in a month, and your last egg froze solid before you could crack it, becoming a hard, useless lump. You'd huddle over your sad little stew, made from whatever hadn't molded yet, and with a grim determination call it a holy sacrifice. But you didn't dare question it. The church was everywhere. It owned vast tracts of land. It controlled calendars, dictating every aspect of your life. It collected dues relentlessly, and it told you explicitly that everything you endured in this miserable life, the mud, the hunger, the cold, would be worth it if you simply followed its rigid rules. And if you didn't, eternal fire. Not metaphorical fire, actual burning, shrieking, forever fire. That's what waited for you if you slipped up, a terrifying threat. The weather itself was a sermon, a constant, physical reminder of God's power. A sudden, violent storm, God's warning, His wrath. A stretch of unusually mild days, God's mercy. A brief reprieve, a frozen, failed crop. Someone sinned. Who? Unclear, but definitely someone. This turned villages into moral pressure cookers, simmering with suspicion. Neighbors watched neighbors, their cautious trust strained. The widow who muttered too loudly during Mass, the man who skipped Vespers, the child who asked too many questions, exhibiting new ideas. Any of them could be the reason the goats froze, the cause of widespread suffering. The line between spiritual and social punishment blurred quickly, becoming indistinguishable. Gossip spread like frost across a field, chilling everything it touched. You'd hear whispers, "She doesn't kneel properly," or "I saw him work on the Sabbath." The next thing you knew, you were at the center of a prayer circle, or worse, an accusation. Your reputation building wealth with fear. And while you were freezing your extremities off, trying desperately to be a good person, the priest, with his comfortable inherited status, lived just a little warmer. Not truly wealthy by noble standards, but definitely better off than you.